I spent most of my life believing a mother's love didn't need recognition to matter, but I was wrong. Because love without recognition slowly becomes invisible. And invisible things, people trip over them like they're not even there. I used to think that if I just kept giving, my son would always remember who helped him become the man he is. Turns out, he did become that man, but forgot the hands that raised him. The morning sun poured through the curtains, casting a soft glow on my kitchen table where my tea had long gone cold. I didn't mind. I'd always been someone who forgot her tea while thinking too much. The small cottage I'd lived in for over 40 years sat quietly at the edge of town, tucked behind a fading white fence, and rows of lavender I tended like they were family. My name is Lorraine Beckett. I'm 76, and for most of my life, I played the same role a lot of women my age know too well. The dependable one, the fixer, the one who never lets the roof leak or the fridge go empty, the one who never says no, especially to her son. Jeremy, my only child, came into this world in a storm, literally. Thunder cracked the sky when I went into labor, and the nurses joked that a dramatic entrance must mean a dramatic life. They weren't wrong. Jeremy was smart, sharp, ambitious. He always wanted more than this sleepy New Hampshire town could offer, and I was determined to give him every chance to fly. After his father passed when Jeremy was just 12, there was no option but to carry everything alone. I went from part-time teacher to full-time provider, worked mornings at the elementary school, evenings tutoring, summers cleaning houses for extra income, anything to get him through college. I don't say this to earn praise, just so you understand where the story begins. See? Jeremy never asked for much growing up. He didn't need to. I gave freely, paid for college, then helped with his first apartment in Boston. When his marriage fell apart at 36, I was the one who drove down with casseroles and gentle advice, never once saying I told you so even when I could have. And when he bounced back, started his own consulting firm, and made more in a month than I had in a year. Well, I didn't expect repayment, just a little recognition. Maybe a thank you that wasn't attached to a Venmo request. But that's the funny thing about raising someone to be independent. They often forget who taught them to stand. A week ago, Jeremy called to tell me he was getting remarried. Caitlin. That was her name. He said it like I should already know it. Maybe he'd mentioned her once or twice in passing, but I hadn't registered anything serious. She's great, he said. Really organized. She's planning the whole thing. His voice had that upbeat tone he used when asking for something. And sure enough, a minute later, so, I was wondering if you could help out a little with the wedding costs. A little, that word did a lot of heavy lifting. How much are we talking, honey? I asked, trying to sound casual. He hesitated. Well, we've got our eyes on Maplewood Estate. The gardens are gorgeous. Caitlin's dream venue. The deposit's hefty, but if you could cover most of it, I swear I'll pay you back. Of course he wouldn't. And of course I said yes anyway. I wired over $20 for the deposit that afternoon. Another $18 then would follow over the next few weeks for flowers, the caterer, an open bar, and God knows what else. I told myself it was worth it, that it might bring us closer again, that maybe this wedding would be the bridge back to something we'd lost. And for a little while, I believed it. Jeremy started calling more often. Sent me photos of tablecloths and dessert samples. I got an official invitation in the mail, not just an email or a text, but a real card with gold lettering. For a second, I felt like maybe I'd stepped into a Hallmark movie, and it was finally my turn for the happy ending. I ironed my best blouse that night. I pulled out my pearl earrings, the ones Alfred gave me on our 25th anniversary. I even thought about what kind of toast I'd give at the reception. Something warm. Something people would remember, but what no one tells you is that a revenge story doesn't always start with betrayal. Sometimes, it starts with a slow drip of being forgotten, a seat moved further from the head table, a name left off a list, a conversation you're no longer invited to. That's the part that breaks you quietly. That's the part no one claps for. And I hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. I probably should have known something was off when I wasn't invited to help pick the flowers. I mean, I'd paid for them, or at least a good chunk of them. But maybe that's how modern weddings work. Maybe mothers are just ceremonial now, there for photos, not planning. Like antique vases, they look nice in the corner, but you don't ask them where to put the couch. 2 days after I wired the first deposit, Caitlin called me. It was our first real conversation. She sounded bright and bubbly, the way women on wedding reality shows do. Hi, Lorraine. I just wanted to say thank you so much for helping us with the venue. Maplewood is going to be magical. I smiled, even though I was alone in my kitchen. Of course, honey, I'm happy to help. Let me know if you need anything else. Oh no, she chirped. We've got everything under control, but it means a lot to Jeremy. He's lucky to have you. It was polite, perfectly nice, but something in her tone made me feel like she was a brand ambassador, not a future daughter-in-law. She didn't ask how I was, didn't ask about my dress, didn't say, "We're so excited you'll be there." Just, "Thank you," like a transaction. Still, I let it go. I was trying not to read too deeply into things. Mothers of grown sons know that line. We're always one word away from sounding needy or too much. So I bit my tongue. When the wedding planning really kicked into gear, Jeremy started calling more often. He gave me little updates. The band was booked. Caitlin was ordering custom napkins. They were adding a dessert bar. Each time, I'd nod and say, "That sounds lovely." Each time, he'd casually mention a new cost. The bar package is an extra $4,000. But Caitlin really wants signature cocktails. The tent rental, another $5,000. Photographer's a bit pricey, but her work's amazing. And like a fool, I just kept wiring the money. Viewers, have you ever said yes too many times because you were afraid that one no might cost you the last thread of connection with someone you love? That's what it felt like. Every payment wasn't just money. It was me trying to buy back my place in his life. Then came the seating chart. Jeremy texted one night, "Hey Mom, just a heads up. Caitlin's putting the guest list together this week. Anyone you want to invite?" It felt strange, like I was being offered a courtesy, not a right. Still, I gave him 2 names, Marge and Josephine. Friends from my church group, and the only 2 people I still saw regularly outside of holidays. He texted back, "Cool. Might be tight on space, but we'll figure it out." That was it. No follow-up. No, we'll make sure you're seated with them. I didn't even know if I was sitting with Jeremy and Caitlin's family. Later, I overheard him on the phone with someone, saying, "Yeah, Caitlin's parents are at the head table. Obviously, her sister too. Oh, and her aunt, who's flying in from LA. I wasn't mentioned." I told myself again, it's their day. Let them plan it. But something started cracking inside. Not breaking, just cracking. A little shift in the ground under my feet. A week later, I asked Jeremy if I could stop by the estate during the rehearsal setup. I wanted to see the garden I'd paid for. Maybe bring some homemade lemon bars for the staff. He paused. Actually, the planner says it'll be kinda chaotic. Maybe it's best if you come just for the ceremony." I blinked. "Jeremy, I've never even seen the venue. I'd like to help." "You've helped enough, Mom," he said. "Just relax and enjoy the day. Caitlin wants it to be streamlined." That word, streamlined, rubbed against me like sandpaper. What did that mean? That I was clutter? I didn't say that, of course. I just said, "All right, honey," and hung up. Then I went and cried in the laundry room so no one would hear me. The following afternoon, Marge dropped by with a pie. I tried to smile, but she saw right through me. "They treating you like an honored guest or a pocketbook?" she asked, half joking. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my email to check for updates. Nothing. Just a reminder from the estate confirming the payment schedule. Second to last installment, due by Friday. $9,000. I clicked pay now without thinking. Later that night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and wondered, would it still be Jeremy's wedding if I wasn't there? The way things were going, I wasn't sure I'd be missed. Sometimes I wonder how many mothers sit quietly in the background, smiling for photos while they're quietly being erased from the center of the story they help build. I think more than we realize. And to anyone watching, especially if you've ever paid for something with both your wallet and your soul, let me say this: you are not invisible. Even if they try to crop you out of the picture, you were there. You mattered. Even if they act like you didn't. The dress had been hanging on my closet door for a week. Pale silver, soft chiffon, sleeves just long enough to cover the crepe in my arms, collar just high enough to remind me who I still was. It wasn't expensive, certainly not like the ones Caitlin had picked out from the bridal boutique in Boston, but it was mine. It felt dignified, steady. I'd already picked out the necklace too, a small pearl pendant Jeremy had given me when he graduated college, back when he still looked at me like I was the reason he made it. The night before the wedding, I didn't sleep. I folded napkins that didn't need folding, rearranged photos on the mantel that had been there for years. I brewed tea I didn't drink. My mind kept circling the same question: where will they put me? Not just physically, though that was its own dread, but emotionally. Where did I fit now? Jeremy hadn't mentioned the seating again, hadn't asked if I'd like to say a few words. Caitlin hadn't called. Not once. I kept thinking back to my own wedding, the way Alfred's mother helped me button the back of my gown, how we cried together before I walked down the aisle. She felt like a part of the family, not an inconvenience to keep quiet and seated out of frame. Hat 7. Egg. Tiam. Sharp. I slipped into the dress and fastened the necklace, brushed my hair back and sprayed the lightest perfume I owned. I looked in the mirror and practiced smiling. The kind of smile you give when you want to be remembered fondly by people who barely looked at you. The cab arrived at 9. Maplewood Estate was 20 minutes from my home, but I asked the driver to take the long route, just to breathe, to see the lake, to see something that hadn't changed. The moment we pulled into the gravel drive, I knew I was early. Too early. Staff were still setting up folding chairs and stringing flowers across the arbor. A young man with a clipboard greeted me at the door, confused. "Are you part of the wedding team?" "No," I said, straightening my shoulders. "I'm the groom's mother." His eyes shifted uncomfortably. "Of course." Right this way, ma'am. The planner will find a spot for you to rest." I was escorted into a side room, away from the activity, a reading library, apparently quiet, with big windows and a view of the fountain. But I could already feel what this was, a holding space, a place to keep me out of the way. I sat in silence for 15 minutes before anyone came back. It was Veronica, the wedding planner, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "Mrs. Beckett," she said politely. "You look lovely today." "The ceremony begins at 11:30. We'll escort you to your seat around 11:15. "My seat?" I asked. "May I ask where that is?" She hesitated. "You're at table 9 for the reception, near the garden doors. Great view of the lake. Not with Jeremy." "Oh no, the head table is just for the couple, bridal party, and parents of the bride." She paused, then added quickly, "There wasn't enough room to include everyone." I nodded slowly, absorbing it. Not enough room. I was funding most of the day, but apparently there wasn't room for me. Around 11, I stepped outside. No one stopped me. Guests had begun to arrive, filling the seats under the wide canopy of trees. The air was perfect, cool enough for comfort, bright enough for photos. I stood by the roses I had unknowingly paid to have imported. They were beautiful, fragrant, fragile. And then came the voice behind me, light, clipped, too sweet to be sincere. "Oh, Lorraine, there you are." Caitlin. She looked like something out of a bridal magazine. Crystal beads, cathedral veil, makeup done like a celebrity. I half expected to see her followed by a lighting crew. "I'm glad you're here," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "If you don't mind, the photographer wants all family photos done after the ceremony, but we've asked her to keep it mostly to bridal party and immediate family." "I am immediate family," I said. Her smile thinned. "Of course. We just want a clean aesthetic." Clean aesthetic. I wanted to ask what that made me, a smudge, but I didn't. I nodded, said nothing, and returned to the library. 15 minutes later, someone came to escort me to my seat, front row, far right, not with Jeremy, not with Caitlin's parents, not with anyone I knew. As I sat, I noticed something small but sharp. The ceremony programs had the names of both sets of parents printed, but mine had been shortened. Mother of the groom, L. Beckett. No mention of my first name. No mention of what I had done to build this day. When the music began and Jeremy walked down the aisle, he looked handsome, sharp. The suit fit perfectly. I wanted to stand and wave at him like I did when he was 6 and played the angel in the Christmas play. But he didn't look at me. He looked ahead. And I realized in that moment that my place in this wedding, and maybe in his life, had been carefully planned. Out of sight, out of frame, out of mind. The sun was at its peak by the time the ceremony ended. Guests spilled into the garden like bees from a hive, buzzing, laughing, sipping champagne from tall flutes as if they were all part of a storybook celebration. I stood alone near the roses again, pretending to admire them while quietly trying to steady my breathing. There had been no family photo, no toast, no glance from Jeremy when he and Caitlin said "I do," when the officiant introduced them as husband and wife. I clapped softly, along with everyone else, even though my hands felt like they were moving underwater. Not one person looked my way, not even Caitlin's parents, who I'd met, briefly, over a catered rehearsal dinner I hadn't been invited to, but had unknowingly paid for. As the couple made their way down the aisle, Caitlin radiant in her pearls, Jeremy straight-backed and beaming. The guests cheered like it was the birth of royalty. I smiled, or at least I tried. But it wasn't joy I felt, it was detachment, like I was watching a scene from someone else's life. After a few moments, I decided to walk toward the cocktail area, thinking maybe I'd find Keith, my grandson, Jeremy's son from his first marriage. At least with him, I knew there would be one person who actually wanted me there, and that's when it happened. I was standing near the edge of the photo setup, off to the side and out of the frame, or so I thought, when a young photographer with a camera around her neck approached me with a polite but tight smile. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said. "Would you mind stepping just a bit further back? We're trying to keep this frame focused on the immediate family." I blinked. "I'm the groom's mother," I said quietly. "Oh," she paused, clearly unsure how to respond. "It's just that the couple requested a very clean visual for the photo wall. Minimal distractions." Minimal distractions. That was the word she used. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stood there, stunned, like I had been caught trespassing in my own life. The photographer shifted awkwardly. "If you don't mind," before I could even take a breath to respond, Jeremy appeared. He was walking fast, face tight, clearly annoyed. "Mom," he said under his breath, pulling me gently by the elbow. "Could you maybe head back inside for a little bit?" I looked at him. Really looked. This was the boy I raised. The boy I stayed up nights with when he had the flu. The one I held when he was heartbroken after his divorce. The man I gave nearly $40,000 to, just so he could marry someone who'd never once looked me in the eye like I mattered. "Caitlin's feeling a little tense," he continued. "You being here right now is kind of making things harder for her." "I've barely spoken to anyone," I said, my voice low. "I know, Mom, but just do this for me, okay? Please, do this for him. Like every other thing I'd done for him his whole life." "Where should I go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "There's a quiet space in the library. Veronica said she could bring you some tea." Tea. Like I was being offered a consolation prize for being erased. "I'll go," I said finally. "I won't make a scene." "Thank you," Jeremy said. Not apologetically, not with warmth, just with relief, like I was another problem solved before it got messy. I turned and walked slowly toward the main building, my heels clicking softly against the cobblestone. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because I was tired, but because I knew what this meant. I was no longer part of my son's family. Not really. I was just someone who signed checks. I passed the gift table on my way in and paused. The envelope I'd left earlier was still there, pale silver, tied with a ribbon, Inside was a check for $5,000, a honeymoon gift. I picked it up, slipped it into my purse, and walked on. No one noticed. No one stopped me. Back inside, I sat by the window in the library, looking out at the perfect lawn, the rented musicians, the dancing guests in pastel dresses and tailored suits. They looked like a family. They looked complete, and not a single one of them noticed the groom's mother wasn't there. I sipped the tea Veronica brought me, its warmth no match for the cold blooming inside my chest. I had spent years imagining this day. Not once did I picture myself alone behind a glass window, watching the son I raised act like I didn't exist. But here we were, and suddenly, I knew this wasn't just about a wedding anymore. This was about all the years I gave without asking, all the love I poured without measure. This was what it had become, not just forgotten, erased. The music thumped faintly through the walls. Every few minutes, laughter spilled in as guests passed by the hallway outside, their voices full of celebration. I sat perfectly still in the small velvet armchair in the corner of the Maplewood Estate Library, holding an untouched cup of tea that had long gone cold. I had been in this exact position for over an hour, alone, dressed like someone with a role, sitting like someone who didn't have one. For a long time, I kept trying to explain it away. Maybe Jeremy was just overwhelmed. Maybe Caitlin was just high-strung. Maybe weddings made everyone act strange. I tried to pretend I was okay, that it didn't sting, that I could be the bigger person, as mothers are trained to be, as if dignity meant swallowing humiliation quietly. But then I remembered something my late husband Alfred once said, long before he passed. It was after Jeremy's first birthday party. I had stayed up all night preparing, cooked everything myself, even stitched decorations by hand. But when the day came, no one noticed. They just ate and laughed. And when it was over, I cleaned it all up alone. Alfred sat beside me on the floor afterward, resting his back against the fridge, and said, "You know, sweetheart, people get used to your giving real quick. They start thinking your sacrifices are just scenery. Not centerpiece, not foundation, just background." And today, that's exactly what I had become, set dressing. I stood up slowly and walked over to the window. Outside, the reception was in full swing. Jeremy and Caitlin were posing for more pictures under the pergola. A woman I didn't recognize handed them champagne flutes, and they toasted without looking back. There were no signs of me, no empty seat at the head table, no mention, no trace. I looked down at my pearl necklace, Jeremy's college graduation gift, the one he gave me with a trembling hand and a kiss on the cheek that day when he said, "I owe everything to you, Mom." I touched it now, almost without meaning to. I hadn't taken it off in years, but today, it didn't feel like a symbol of pride. It felt like a lie. At 4:37 p.m. Without telling a soul, I picked up my clutch and walked quietly out of the room. No one saw me leave. There were no goodbyes, no dramatics. I didn't even pause at the guest book table. I stepped out through the side entrance, into the gravel driveway, and called the same cab company that had dropped me off. The driver arrived within 10 minutes. As I opened the door, he looked surprised. "Heading home already?" he asked, glancing at the celebration behind me. "No," I said gently. "I'm heading forward." He didn't ask another question. On the drive back, I looked out the window and breathed. The lake glinted in the sun. Ducks paddled along the shoreline. Kids tossed rocks into the water, laughing like the world hadn't forgotten their mothers. At home, I kicked off my shoes, took off the necklace, and placed it back in its original velvet box. I slid it to the back of the drawer. And then I went to the kitchen, made a fresh cup of tea, hot this time, and sat at the table where I had dreamed of being part of Jeremy's big day. But strangely, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't crying either. I was quiet, but not broken. That was the moment I knew something had shifted. I didn't need an apology. I didn't even want a confrontation. I simply wanted to reclaim something that had been taken from me over the years, slowly, invisibly. My place in my own life. I pulled out my checkbook, found the records of every transfer I had made in the last 3 months. The venue deposit, the caterer, the florist, the band, even the string quartet I never heard play. I totaled it quietly. $38, $4.50, gone, but not wasted, because it had bought me the truth. And the truth was simple. Jeremy didn't forget me by accident. He made choices, repeated ones, and I had enabled them out of love, hoping he'd turn back someday and say, "Thank you, Mom, I see you." But he hadn't. He wouldn't. And now I saw myself, so I made a different choice. No revenge, no tantrum, just clarity. I picked up the envelope I'd taken back from the gift table. The $5,000 honeymoon check was still inside. I didn't rip it up. I didn't burn it. I just placed it in the fireplace and lit a small match. It burned quietly, softly, like a burden lifting. And in its place, a different thought began to form. Not angry, not vengeful, just determined. I had spent nearly 80 years giving. Maybe it was time to keep something for myself. The morning after the wedding, the house felt quieter than usual. Not silent in the peaceful way, quiet like something had ended. I stood by the kitchen sink with my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, looking out at the overgrown garden Jeremy used to run through barefoot. It had rained overnight. Fat. Heavy drops that soaked the soil and softened the edges of everything. My silver dress from yesterday was draped across the back of the dining chair, faint creases still visible from where I had sat in that library. Invisible, but present. I didn't bother to turn on the TV or check my phone. I didn't want to see posts or smiling faces. Or worse, nothing at all. Not a thank you, not a text, not a photo that proved I had even been there. Because maybe that's what hurt most. It's not that I was forgotten. It's that I was erased on purpose. I sat at the table and opened my notebook, the kind I usually used for grocery lists or budgeting. But this time, I made a different kind of list. At the top, I wrote, things I gave without being asked. $20,000 venue deposit, $5. $500 for flowers, $8 for catering upgrades, $2. $200 for linens and tent rentals, $2. $500 for open bar. My name, my presence, my silence. I underlined that last one twice. That's when I knew it wasn't just about the wedding. This had been happening for years. Mother's Days skipped. Birthdays reduced to emojis. Phone calls that ended before I could finish a sentence. I had mistaken politeness for love. Updates for connection. Money for meaning. So I made another list. This one, I titled, What I Still Own. My house, my car, my savings, my name, my time, my story. And then I wrote one last thing. Sevo, the power to choose what happens next. That same afternoon, I drove to my lawyer's office. I hadn't spoken to Bill in years, but he greeted me with a warm smile and a pot of coffee. I need to make some updates to my will. I said simply, no problem. He replied, pulling out a yellow legal pad. I explained that I wanted to remove Jeremy as executor and primary beneficiary. I wasn't angry. I just didn't see the point anymore. I told Bill I'd like my assets to go to a scholarship fund for local girls who'd lost a parent. It felt right, clean, purposeful. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was giving without being erased. Later that evening, I opened the linen closet and pulled out an old suitcase. I filled it slowly. A few cardigans, 2 pairs of jeans, walking shoes, toiletries, and the hardcover novel I never finished. Then I went to the hall closet and pulled down a small box labeled cash, emergency. I'd saved it for decades. Some people prepare for earthquakes. I prepared for the day I might need to disappear quietly. It wasn't a revenge story. It was a release story. Viewers, have you ever reached a point in life when staying felt heavier than walking away? When you realized the people you gave everything to didn't see you unless they needed something? If so, I want to tell you, walking away isn't weakness. It's proof you still remember your own worth. I didn't slam any doors. I didn't call Jeremy or leave a note. I simply packed what I needed, locked up the house, and drove. I didn't even know where I was going at first. I just followed the road out of town and let silence guide me. At some point, I found myself 2 hours north, in a little coastal village I hadn't visited since Jeremy was in high school. It had a bed and breakfast run by a kind woman named Nora. I asked if she had a room for the week. She said she had one better, a room with peace and no expectations. I smiled. It was perfect. That night, I walked the beach alone. The moon was full, casting silver light over the ocean like it was trying to wrap the whole world in quiet forgiveness. I took off my shoes and let the cold water touch my feet. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Free, not because someone had finally seen me, but because I was no longer the woman waiting to be thanked, to be remembered, to be pulled back into the frame. I had stepped out, and this time, I wasn't coming back. The first morning at the coastal inn, I woke up before the sun. The room smelled faintly of lavender and salt air. The windows were slightly cracked, and the curtains danced with the early breeze like they had no idea the world was supposed to be heavy. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't wake with dread. No one was expecting anything from me. No one was waiting on a wire transfer. No guilt text. No subtle demand cloaked as a favor. Just the sound of the ocean outside and the smell of coffee brewing downstairs. I wrapped myself in the old knit cardigan I brought from home and stepped out onto the porch of the inn. Nora, the owner, was already in the garden, watering her herbs. She waved without asking questions, and I liked her instantly for it. "Help yourself to coffee," she called out. I did, and I sat there for an hour, sipping slowly as the sun began its climb, watching the light shift across the water. I thought, so this is what it feels like to just be not useful, not necessary, not taken for granted, just existing, without asking permission. That afternoon, I took a walk into town. The village was small, barely 4 blocks wide, but filled with life that moved at its own pace. There was a bookstore with a crooked little sign, a bakery that smelled like home on a holiday, and a craft shop with a window full of hand-knitted scarves and ceramic mugs. I wandered like I belonged, not in a loud way, in a way that said, I've earned this slowness. When I stepped into the bookstore, a little bell above the door jingled, and a middle-aged man behind the counter looked up and smiled. "You're new." "I'm old," I joked. He laughed. "You're both. But the new part's rarer around here." I ended up buying a journal with a blue linen cover and a novel I'd always meant to read, but never made time for. As I paid, the man, his name was Frank, tucked a bookmark inside and said, "Let me know what you think of the ending." It gets quiet, but in a powerful way. I smiled. I knew that kind of ending. That night, I started writing, not to anyone in particular, not even to myself, really. Just writing to give shape to all the invisible things that had built up over the years. I wrote about giving, about loving blindly, about being slowly pushed out of the picture without ever hearing the word goodbye. And I wrote this sentence in bold across a page. My worth is not determined by how much I'm needed. I stared at it for a long time, then underlined it twice. The next few days moved like warm wind, slow, but sure. I helped Nora bring in groceries, walked the beach in the early evenings, cooked dinner for 2 retired sisters who were staying in the room next door. I didn't tell anyone my full story, just enough to say I was taking a pause. And not one person asked, "When are you going back?" Because somehow they understood. Sometimes back is the wrong direction. By the end of the week, I extended my stay indefinitely. I called the woman who helped clean my house back in New Hampshire and told her I'd be mailing her a key. "List it," I said. "I'm ready to let it go." It felt wild and terrifying, but also calm. Like I was doing something outrageous quietly, which, I think, is the most powerful way to begin again. I didn't hear from Jeremy. Not a call. Not a message. I suspect he was waiting for me to reach out, to smooth things over like I always had. But I didn't. And that silence between us, it used to scare me. Now, it felt like space, room to breathe. Sometimes I'd imagine what he might say if he ever realized I was gone. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because, son, I already had. In 1,000 unspoken ways, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to teach him a lesson. I was simply done performing. Done auditioning for the role of loving mother in a life where that role had been quietly written out of the script. Viewers, have you ever reached that point where leaving didn't feel like giving up, but like coming home to yourself? That's where I was. And for the first time in decades, I didn't care who noticed. It started with a phone call. Jeremy's voice on the voicemail was clipped, like he didn't want to sound too concerned, but also didn't want to admit he'd noticed something wasn't right. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Haven't heard from you since the wedding. Hope you're good. Give me a call when you get this." Yeah. He left that message 3 days after the wedding, and then nothing. No follow-up call. No text. Just silence. Maybe he figured I was giving him space, or maybe, more likely, he didn't really expect me to answer. He'd grown used to me folding myself into the background, so why would he think this time was different? But the next message was different. "Mom, it's Jeremy again. Listen, I dropped by the house. No one answered. The lights were off. I called Miss Langston, your neighbor. She said she hasn't seen you since last week. You okay?" His tone was more nervous this time, still not panicked. Not yet, but the unease had crept in. By the end of the week, Caitlin texted me, "Hi, Lorraine. Hope you're well. Jeremy's been a little worried. Let us know if you need anything." I didn't respond. They weren't used to silence from me. For years, I was the one who checked in. I was the one who sent care packages, remembered anniversaries, filled the gaps, offered the apologies no one asked for. But now, I had gone still, and in that stillness, something began to echo. They began to notice the absence of effort. And absence, I've learned, is sometimes louder than presence. Jeremy called again 5 days later. "Okay, Mom, I don't know what's going on. I'm trying not to freak out, but it's weird now. Your car's gone. House is locked up. Caitlin says she found the check envelope missing from the gift table. Did you take it? I don't get it." "No, son, you don't. Because I never made you learn how to see the people you loved unless they were offering something." Back in the coastal town, I was sitting by the harbor with my journal when Nora came out with her usual warm smile. "There's a man on the phone for you," she said gently. "Says he's your son." I looked at the phone on the front desk, ringing quietly. Nora placed it down and stepped away without a word. I didn't answer. Not because I was being cruel, but because I had nothing left to explain. My absence wasn't a punishment. It was clarity. I wasn't waiting to be called back into the picture. I had left the frame later that evening. I walked down the dock and watched the fishing boats return one by one. The men greeted each other with nods and tired smiles. No fanfare, just the quiet understanding that they had done something hard, and now it was time to rest. That's what I was doing now, learning to rest after a lifetime of rowing. Meanwhile, back home, things were unraveling slowly. Jeremy had tried to file a police report, but I wasn't missing. I had paid my bills. I had voluntarily vacated my house. I had left no evidence of harm, only choice. Caitlin grew agitated. "She's trying to make you feel guilty," she said. "This is all some kind of emotional manipulation." "No," Jeremy muttered, rubbing his temples. "This doesn't feel like guilt. This feels like she's done." It took him long enough. 2 weeks later, I received a letter in Nora's mailbox. It was written on plain white paper in Jeremy's handwriting, messier than usual. There were no grand apologies, just a few scattered sentences. "I guess I didn't realize how much you did until you stopped doing it. I'm sorry if the wedding hurt you. I didn't mean for it to be like that. I just thought you'd always be there." There it was. The truth, so many children whisper too late. They think we'll always be there. Until one day, we're not. I folded the letter neatly and placed it inside my journal. Not because I forgave him, but because I wanted to remember what silence had taught him. Viewers, tell me honestly, how many of you have carried your entire family on your back, only to realize they never once asked how heavy the load was? Have you ever felt like if you stopped giving, you'd simply vanish from their lives? Well, sometimes vanishing is the only way they'll learn what you were. I wasn't trying to punish Jeremy. I wasn't even hoping he'd change. But now, he'd finally felt the weight of my absence. And for once, it wasn't me holding all the pieces together. It's strange how quickly a new place can start to feel like home when no one's asking anything of you. 3 weeks into my stay at the coastal village, I stopped counting the days. My morning coffee came with a soft breeze through the screen door and the sound of gulls crying overhead. I started baking again, just simple things, like lemon muffins and oatmeal cookies. Nora let me use her kitchen, as long as I saved her a few. The bed and breakfast wasn't full most days, so it felt less like a business and more like a quiet house full of people on their own silent journeys. We didn't pry into each other's lives. There was a comfort in that. I spent my afternoons painting. Nothing fancy, just small canvases of sea rocks and windowsills and hands holding teacups. I hadn't held a brush in decades. Not since Jeremy was a boy and I'd stopped painting because there were always other things to do. Soccer practices, parent-teacher meetings, overtime at the nursing home. I hadn't even realized how much I missed creating something just for myself. One day, Nora peeked over my shoulder and said, "That's beautiful." "Lorraine, it's messy." I smiled. "Maybe?" She shrugged. "But it's yours." And it was. Every crooked brushstroke, every color that didn't quite match the real sky, it was mine. And no one was asking me to be better at it. No one was critiquing or asking what it was for. It didn't need to earn its place. Neither did I. That weekend, the town hosted its seasonal community market. I rented a small table on a whim, more for the company than for sales, and displayed 6 of my little paintings, along with some of the muffins I'd made the night before. I didn't expect much, but a little girl with pigtails dragged her father over and pointed at a painting of an old pair of hands holding a daisy. "She's smiling like Grandma," the girl whispered. And just like that, it sold. By noon, I had sold 4 paintings and ran out of cookies. A woman asked if I took commissions, and a man invited me to display some work at the local gallery's open wall next month. I blinked, stunned. This wasn't the life I expected, but it was life, and it was happening. Quietly, without a single post, without fanfare, and without anyone back home knowing I'd become someone more than just a mother. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of the women in my old neighborhood, the ones who used to say things like, "Well, that's just how sons are," or "It's the daughter-in-law's fault." Not his. They meant well, but they were wrong. Sometimes the betrayal doesn't come with yelling. Sometimes it's just slow forgetting. Death by 1,000 unreturned calls. 1,000 unacknowledged sacrifices. And when you finally leave, they're stunned. As if love means staying, no matter how invisible you've become. Viewers, I want to ask you something, quietly, from one woman to another. Have you ever done so much for someone that you stopped recognizing who you were outside of them? Have you ever felt guilty for wanting a life that didn't revolve around being someone else's support system? If you have, I want to tell you something gently. You're allowed to bloom in places no one is watching. You're allowed to matter, even when no one claps for it. Later that week, I used the money from the market to sign up for an oil painting class at the community center. The instructor, a spry woman in her 60s named Valerie, gave each of us a single rule on day 1. Paint what you feel, not what they expect. It stayed with me. By now, I was no longer waking up and checking my phone. I didn't keep track of Jeremy's social media or wonder if he'd called again. I'd left the letter in my journal and let it be. Because this new life I was building, it wasn't a statement. It was a sanctuary. One morning, as I walked down the boardwalk with a paint-stained tote bag slung over my shoulder, I caught my reflection in the glass of the pottery shop. I looked older, but lighter. I didn't look like a woman waiting for anything anymore. And that's when I realized I had stopped waiting for someone to say, "We see what you did." I had stopped begging for space in someone else's life. And in that space, something new had taken root. Not loud, but steady, not perfect. But mine. Jeremy didn't even realize he was packing until the suitcase clicked shut. It was a Sunday afternoon. Quiet. Gray, and Caitlin had gone to brunch with friends. He'd been sitting on the edge of the bed for nearly an hour, staring at his phone, scrolling back through every unanswered message he'd left his mother. The last one was just a few days ago. Please, just let me know you're safe. But there was no read receipt. No little gray delivered. It was like texting into the wind. He finally muttered, "Screw it," tossed in a jacket, and booked a one-way flight to New Hampshire. The house was locked, still perfectly clean, no sign of struggle. The blinds were drawn, and the porch plant had started to wither, something his mother would never let happen. He tried the spare key hidden in the lantern by the garage. It fit. Inside, the air felt stale, untouched. Mail sat unopened on the counter. Her favorite coffee mug was still on the drying rack. The house felt less like someone had left, and more like someone had quietly slipped out of the frame. He checked the closets, half empty. The photo of him from high school graduation was missing from the hallway wall. Only the small nail remained. That hit harder than he expected. Jeremy drove to the bank next. The teller confirmed that the account associated with his mother had been closed. The money moved somewhere else, but they couldn't say where. He sat in the car, engine running, staring at his own reflection in the rear-view mirror. What had he done? Or worse, what hadn't he done? Next was her old friend Judith, who lived just 2 blocks over. A woman who once babysat Jeremy during snowstorms when Lorraine had to work double shifts at the courthouse. She was here a few weeks ago, Judith said, squinting at him through her porch screen. Dropped off a few boxes, gave me her extra canning supplies. Said she was going on a trip. Did she say where? Nope, but she seemed lighter. You know, Jeremy didn't. Not really, but he nodded anyway. The last stop was the local florist, a tiny shop Lorraine used to visit every Friday, just to see what was in season. The woman behind the counter smiled when he mentioned her name. Oh yes, she left me a card, said thank you for always remembering her favorite peonies. She left you a card? Yep, in person. She looked happy, said she was starting a new chapter. Jeremy blinked. The thing was, his mother had said goodbye, just not to him. He sat in his rental car that night. Outside the diner they used to visit every other Sunday when he was a kid. She always ordered chicken pot pie. He always asked for extra whipped cream on his milkshake. It had been years since they'd sat in those booths together, maybe more than he wanted to admit. And now she was somewhere else, out in the world, living a life he wasn't part of. And maybe that's what stung the most. Not that she had left, but that she'd finally realized she could. Viewers, maybe you've been in Jeremy's shoes, realizing too late that someone who always showed up for you just stopped. Or maybe you're on the other side. Maybe you are the one who finally stepped out of the picture. Whichever side you're on, here's what I've learned. People don't always slam doors. Sometimes they just quietly lock them behind them and walk away. And if you were the one who walked away, know this? You didn't leave to teach a lesson. You left to find peace. And peace doesn't require an audience. It was a Tuesday morning when I first noticed how full my calendar had become. Not with obligations, but with choices. The oil painting class on Mondays, a small writing group on Wednesdays, Friday evenings at the market where I sold cookies and hand-painted greeting cards that locals now looked forward to. I had a life here, and not once had I needed to explain it to anyone. That was the quiet miracle. I'd rented a little cottage behind Nora's Inn, not much, just 2 rooms and a screened porch, but it was mine. The walls smelled like old pine, and the floors creaked, like they'd been waiting decades for someone to care again. I hung my paintings without asking if they were good enough. I brewed coffee the way I liked, strong, with cinnamon. I danced around barefoot to old jazz records on Saturday mornings, and sometimes cried when the trumpet swelled. But they were not sad tears. They were the kind that fall when something dormant finally remembers how to feel. One afternoon, while reorganizing a box of old art supplies, I found a small photo tucked between 2 sketch pads. It was of Jeremy, age 6, covered in chocolate frosting at his birthday party. I smiled, tracing the outline of his chubby cheeks with my thumb. I didn't hate him. I didn't even resent him anymore. Because here's the truth, no one tells mothers. You can love someone and still walk away when loving them costs you yourself. At the community center, I helped plan a small art showcase. Valerie, the instructor, offered to display my latest pieces. She insisted on putting one front and center, a painting of two hands, one aged and steady, the other young and slightly reaching, but not grasping. I titled it Letting Go. Gently, it sold in 10 minutes. Not because it was extraordinary, but because someone saw something true in it. And for the first time, I didn't downplay the compliment. I just said, "Thank you." That one came from someplace deep. Because it did. On Sundays, I sometimes walked the beach with a thermos of tea and a blanket. I'd sit quietly and sketch shells, clouds, footprints, things that never stayed long, but still mattered while they were here. It reminded me of myself. I wasn't trying to leave a legacy anymore. I was just trying to live, and not as someone's mother, or caretaker, or invisible backbone, but as Lorraine. Just Lorraine. Viewers, maybe you know what I mean. Maybe you've had years of being needed, but never truly seen. Maybe you've been the glue, the cook, the one who remembers everyone's birthday, but can't remember the last time someone remembered yours. If that's you, I want to say something. You are allowed to start a life that doesn't require permission slips. You are allowed to matter outside of your usefulness. You are allowed to hang your own paintings, pour your own coffee, and finally breathe in a space that's yours. That week, I wrote a letter, not to Jeremy, to myself. It wasn't long, just a few lines. Dear Lorraine, you're doing more than surviving now. You're blooming. And the best part, you did it quietly, without applause, without revenge, just truth. I folded it and taped it to the inside of my kitchen cabinet. Behind the mugs, a little reminder, tucked where only I would see it, because I didn't need anyone else to validate what I had become. I just needed to remember I chose it. It was almost spring when the letter came. Not a text, not a voicemail. A real letter, creased, hand-addressed, and slightly smudged in the corner like the sender had hesitated before dropping it into the mailbox. It was from Jeremy. Mom, I don't know if this will reach you, but I've been holding these words in for too long. Maybe because I didn't know how to say them. Maybe because part of me thought you'd eventually come back, and we could skip the hard stuff. Pretend it didn't happen. But the silence has been loud, and it's teaching me things I wish I had learned sooner. I know I took you for granted. I know I let Caitlin's priorities become mine, and I let you fade into the background because it was easier than acknowledging how much I leaned on you. You gave everything, and I acted like you owed it to me. You never did. I'm sorry. For the wedding, for the years before that, for the way I let you become invisible in a life you helped build. If you ever want to talk, or even just let me know you're okay, I'd be grateful. But if not, I understand. Love, Jeremy. I read it twice, not because I didn't believe it, but because I finally did. He had changed. Maybe not entirely, but enough to realize what was lost. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same journal where I'd kept his first note, back when he was just beginning to feel the edges of my absence. But I didn't write him back, not because I was punishing him, but because this story wasn't about him anymore. That week, I sat by the ocean longer than usual. The sky was soft and overcast, the kind of gray that makes everything feel like a memory. A few boats bobbed in the harbor, their ropes creaking gently with the tide. Behind me, the town was preparing for its annual spring gallery walk. I'd been asked to feature a dozen paintings, my name printed in elegant serif font on the flyer. Lorraine Mitchell, Quiet Light. Quiet Light. I'd never chosen that title, but it felt right. My life now moved with that kind of light. Not harsh, not demanding attention, just steady and real and warm. If you stood still long enough to notice it. Jeremy never showed up to the gallery. I think he wanted to, maybe even planned to, but in the end, he didn't. And I didn't wait for him to walk through the door. I was too busy talking to a woman who'd purchased one of my pieces, a watercolor of a rocking chair with a shawl thrown over the arm. It reminds me of my mother, she said. She passed last year, but this feels like her still watching over me. I squeezed her hand gently. That's exactly what it's meant to feel like. And maybe that was the moment I knew I had arrived, not at a destination, but at peace. Viewers, if you've made it this far, I want to ask you something from the bottom of my heart. Have you ever waited for someone to realize your worth, only to find out that silence says more than begging ever could? Have you ever walked away, not out of anger, but out of sheer exhaustion from being unseen? Because I have, and I want you to know, there is life after erasure. There is dignity in not clapping back. There is power in reclaiming your name without demanding anyone else say it. This wasn't a revenge story in the traditional sense. It was something deeper. It was a return to self. And sometimes, the greatest justice isn't a dramatic confrontation. It's the quiet knowledge that you've survived what was meant to erase you. A few months later, I mailed Jeremy a postcard. It wasn't long, just one sentence. "I'm okay. I hope you will be too." That was all. No forwarding address, no promise of reunion. Just truth, clean and simple. Because some doors don't slam shut. They just drift closed. And the people on the other side, they'll either learn to knock with gentleness, or they'll live forever wondering what they could have said differently. That night, I painted a new piece, a single chair, facing the sea, empty, but peaceful. And in the corner, I signed it with something I'd never dared write before. Lorraine, no longer someone's mother, just someone. Dear viewer, if this story has stirred something within you, a memory, a realization, or a sense of quiet strength, I'd love to hear from you. Share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever reached a point where stepping away felt like the only way to reclaim your sense of self? Did you discover unexpected peace after choosing your own path? Your story matters. By opening up, you encourage someone else who might be silently struggling. Let's build a community where silence transforms into empowerment, and where choosing yourself becomes an act of courage. You're not alone in this journey. Right here, right now, your voice can inspire healing and connection for someone who needs it. Thank you for listening, for sharing, and for caring. I can't wait to read your reflections and support one another through every step of reclaiming our lives. Let's begin this conversation together today.